So we're talking about ego and how it's sort of like a counter consciousness in the way that it consciousness you kind of have it's kind of like it's a duality there between consciousness and ego, and everybody's somewhere on the scale kind of. So everybody's like somewhere on the scale between ego and consciousness, and basically the difference is perspective, like just how like broad you can grow your perspective to see more going ons of things, and see the bigger system, you know, playing behind what the normal person's perspective would see with more ego. So it's basically having a broader perspective the more conscious you are, and having a narrower, more uh, zoomed in perspective the more you're attached to your ego. So along with narrowing your perspective when you're more attached with ego, it's basically trying to strengthen its own identity, or what you think your identity is. That's what your ego is trying to do. So in order to strengthen its identity or its uniqueness or its separation from others, that makes it not making it. It's kind of the opposite of it, but you know what I mean. um, so in order to like strengthen its identity and kind of making it stand out, it has to separate itself from other stuff, and that's kind of where that plays into the narrowing of perspective, because it's kind of trying to, instead of broadening its perspective to encompass other perspectives, it's trying to separate itself. So it narrows its perspective and just tries to defend that and make its perspective seem true over other perspectives.
So our ego is ourselves, our own consciousness trying to identify itself with whatever influences and meaning we've put behind the world. So we kind of strengthen our identity through what just we know, and we, like you were saying, we become very narrow-minded because we are attaching ourselves to this. It is a fictional world that we're making up because we're sort of creating our laws and how things work. This is like, I'm right because of this, you're wrong because of that, that should be that way because of that way, when in reality there's no right or wrong. There's 100 ways to skin a cat, etc. There's, when your ego does that, it's eliminating the outside universe, and it's sort of, you're going back into thinking about thoughts versus letting new thoughts arise. And so your actions become more selfish, your personality usually becomes more selfish, or it doesn't even need to be selfish. You could just be ignorant in some way and just too clouded minded in one perspective. And that's your ego making those attachments and defying itself who you are because of this, when really you want to free that. You want to be a little more, you want your higher consciousness to come out. So you want to be able to think more on the fly, more level-headed and clear, be the outside perspective in the situation. And that's where the battle with your ego comes in, and trying to identify just those random thoughts on a whim that come up. Like, there's a lot of times we have thoughts where we don't really have intentions. Like, we don't know where this thought come up. Like, I want to kill somebody. When that comes up in your head and you're like, oh, I don't really want to kill them. Like, what's going on here? And that's sort of, that's a very simplified version, but those are the kind of thoughts you have to weigh out. Like, is this where I want to go with this, or is this my ego speaking for me? What actions do I want to take out? What thoughts do I want to have? And there's always going to be the continuous struggle with your ego. Your ego is always trying to stand in the way. He's trying to be the higher consciousness. He's disguising himself as a higher consciousness. He's just always blocking the light, so you just constantly have to be peering around the corner, just little distraction here, peek around, just get the outside perspective, see the light coming from a different source. Because your ego, your natural thought process, is going to be your ego making decisions. So it's sort of sitting on something rather than immediate action, like thinking about what you say before you say it.
Okay. Thinking it's kind of it's like a separate point than what you were saying, but was like what I was saying before, where it's trying to kind of separate itself. If you think about like school kids or stuff, and then like that one, like that one group of a few cool kids, it's like they're strengthening their identity as a group, and they're identifying with that group. Like, oh, I'm one of them, but that only works because they've separated themselves from the group.
Yeah.
So in like that kind of way is like what I was saying with the ego is trying to identify with stuff, but it's trying to strengthen its identity by identifying with stuff. And in order to strengthen an individual identity, it needs to separate from the rest. So it's just kind of same kind of thing with like the school kid thing. And with it being sort of like that counter consciousness, or kind of the opposite of being more conscious. Being more conscious is like the recognition of broader perspectives, or a more all-encompassing perspective, where you see everything as one, or see everything as the same, which is basically the opposite of separating to strengthen identity. It's getting rid of separation, but also to strengthen identity.
Exactly.
Kind of weird. It's kind of like the illusion trying to strengthen itself versus reality, or consciousness, or it trying to strengthen itself.
Yeah, it's sort of, you just build yourself up mentally in a false way. And sometimes your ego can work for you. You gotta have a good ego sometimes.
It's your piece in the game.
Yeah. But there's those fine lines of when putting morals into play and just trying to, I don't know, be a calmer person, a better person, just being able to identify and separate from that goes a long way.
Sometimes you just need a break from the game, and that recognition that there's a separation there can really kind of give you that. It's like you're stopping to take a breath.
Yeah, it's sort of like when you're having those nightmares, and like in the back of your head it's a
Which
dream.
ones? How'd you know about my nightmares?
But you can sort of wake yourself up.
Yeah.
And you get that calming relief, like, okay, well, it's just a dream. That's kind of how it is. Like you were saying, when you got to have a break from the game.
Yeah.
And so when things are too much, you have to take that time aside and comfort yourself. Let your ego, put him in its place, and just
look at it. Remember that guy? Just look at it. Just look at it.
It's all just the game.
Yeah, just gotta take that second to be the observer and just see it as a game and be like, oh yeah, okay, going back in.